I grew up in a quiet town in northern Maine, a place where everyone knew each other and secrets rarely stayed hidden. But there was one mystery that no one could ever explain, a story that has haunted me since childhood. It's about a man who lived on the outskirts of town, a man known only as the Silent Man. The Silent Man's house was an old, decaying structure nestled deep in the woods. It stood apart from the rest of the town, as if the trees and the land themselves wanted nothing to do with him. I remember riding my bike past that house when I was 8 years old. Even in the daylight, the place seemed dark. The windows were covered in grime, and the door was a splintered mess that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. But the worst part was the silence. No birds sang, no wind rustled the leaves, nothing. It was as if the world held its breath whenever you came near. No one knew much about the man who lived there. He was rarely seen in town, and when he was, he never spoke a word. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face that seemed permanently etched with sorrow. His eyes were dark and empty, like deep pools of shadow that seemed to swallow the light around them. Some said he had lost his family in a fire, others claimed he was an escaped convict, but the truth was that no one really knew. The only thing everyone agreed on was that you didn't go near his house after dark. One autumn evening, my friends and I were hanging out near the edge of the woods, telling ghost stories and trying to scare each other. It was the kind of night where the chill in the air made you pull your jacket tighter, but the thrill of fear kept you warm. Joey, the bravest, or maybe the dumbest, of our group, suggested we dare each other to go up to the Silent Man's house. I immediately said no, but the others were all for it. Peer pressure is a powerful thing, especially when you're 12 years old and trying to prove you're not a chicken. The dare was simple. Walk up to the front door, knock 3 times, and then run back as fast as you could. Joey volunteered to go first, of course. We followed him through the woods, the trees closing in around us as we got closer to the house. The air grew colder, and that eerie silence descended, making the crunch of leaves under our feet sound like thunder. When we finally reached the clearing, the house loomed before us, even more menacing in the twilight. Joey hesitated for a moment, but then squared his shoulders and walked up to the door. He knocked once, twice, 3 times. We held our breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen, but nothing did. Joey grinned back at us, clearly pleased with himself, and started to walk back. But then, as he turned away from the door, we all saw it. A face appeared in the window, pale, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. It was the Silent Man. He was staring right at us. We bolted. I've never run so fast in my life. We didn't stop until we were back in town, panting and terrified. We swore never to speak of what we'd seen, but the image of that face haunted my dreams for weeks. None of us ever went near the Silent Man's house again. Years passed, and the memory of that night faded, though it never completely left me. I moved away for college, eager to leave the small town and its unsettling secrets behind. But whenever I visited my parents, I couldn't help but think about the Silent Man. The stories persisted, but they had become more like urban legends, a part of the town's dark folklore. Then, a few months ago, my mother called me with news that made my blood run cold. The Silent Man's house had burned down. The fire department said it was likely caused by faulty wiring, but the house had no electricity, so that didn't make sense. What was even stranger was that no remains were found in the ashes. It was as if the Silent Man had vanished into thin air. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to return to my hometown to see the site for myself. The woods were different now, more overgrown and wild, as if trying to reclaim the land. When I reached the clearing, I found nothing but charred earth and blackened trees. But that oppressive silence was still there, heavier than ever. As I stood in the center of the ruins, I felt a chill run down my spine, the same fear I had felt all those years ago. I turned to leave, but then I heard it. a faint, whispering voice like the wind through the trees. It was calling my name. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it was all I could hear. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with a presence, something watching, waiting. I ran back to my car, not daring to look back, and sped out of those woods. I haven't returned to my hometown since. I tried to forget, to convince myself it was just my imagination. But I know better. The silent man is still out there, and he's not alone. He's waiting for someone to hear his story. And now that you've heard it, you'll never be able to forget it either. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of the strange and terrifying. And remember, the scariest stories are the ones that feel like they could happen to you, because sometimes they do. James Foster moved into an old house on the outskirts of Portland, looking for peace and solitude. His neighbors rarely saw him. He only went out for groceries and sometimes for evening walks. No one knew what he was doing, and James was quite happy with that. The house was old, with creaky floors and faded wallpaper, but it was the large antique mirror in the living room that caught James's eye the most. It was in a heavy gilded frame, with barely noticeable cracks along the edges of the glass. The first few weeks passed quietly. James tried to settle into his new place, fighting the insomnia that had plagued him for years. But one evening, everything changed. As James walked past the mirror, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned sharply, but saw only his reflection. Chalking it up to fatigue, he went to bed. The next night, the situation repeated itself. This time, James could have sworn he saw the face of a young man in the mirror, which quickly disappeared. James's heart beat faster, but he convinced himself that it was just a play of light and shadow. Every day, the strange events increased. James began to see more and more strangers in the mirror. They would appear for a moment and disappear, but their faces were full of pain and accusation. James tried to ignore these visions. He started drinking to numb his anxiety and fear. But alcohol only made things worse. Now he saw ghosts not only in the large mirror, but also in every reflective surface, windows, TV screen, even a glass of water. One night James woke up with the feeling that someone was watching him. He opened his eyes and saw that the room was filled with ghostly figures. They were silently looking at him, and in their eyes he saw pain, fear, and accusation. James screamed and ran for the door, but the ghosts surrounded him. He recognized some of the faces: a young Afghan boy, an elderly woman from Iraq, a group of teenagers from Syria. All of them he had seen through the scope of his sniper rifle, because James Foster was not always a lonely drunk in an old house. He used to be a sergeant in an elite sniper unit, carrying out covert missions all over the world. He was the best at what he did. He never missed. But every shot, every face he saw in the last moment of their lives stayed with him forever. Now, they all came for him. James fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, but the ghosts did not retreat. They reached out to him, and James felt a coldness pierce his body. The neighbors found James the next morning. He was lying on the living room floor, his eyes wide open, and a look of indescribable horror frozen on his face. The large mirror was broken, and shards were scattered all over the room. The police attributed it to an accident. A drunken man fell and broke the mirror. But those who saw James's body said that his hair had turned gray overnight, and his skin bore marks as if he had been touched by dozens of cold hands. James's house stood empty for a long time. No one wanted to buy it, and those who did dare to go inside said that they sometimes saw the faces of strangers in the windows and mirrors, looking at them with mute accusation. Only an old neighbor who sometimes saw James on his nightly walks once said, "You can't escape the past. It will always find a way to remind you of itself, and sometimes our own reflections become our worst nightmares." It was a late October evening. Michael was returning home from an important business meeting in a neighboring city. Tired, he decided to take a shortcut through the old town. The GPS led him through the narrow streets, and soon Michael realized he was lost. Suddenly, his car stalled right at the entrance to an old cemetery. No matter how hard Michael tried, the car would not start. His cell phone didn't work either, not a single signal. "Great," Michael muttered. "I'll have to find help on foot." He got out of the car and looked around. The only source of light was the full moon hanging over the cemetery. Michael decided to walk through the cemetery. It seemed like the shortest way to the city. As he entered the cemetery grounds, the fog began to thicken around his feet. The silence was oppressive, with only the wind rustling the fallen leaves. Michael sped up his pace, feeling inexplicably anxious. Suddenly he saw the silhouette of a woman near one of the graves. As he approached, Michael froze in shock. It was his late wife, Sarah, who had died 5 years earlier. "Sarah?" he whispered in disbelief. The woman turned, and Michael saw her pale face and sad eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "you finally came." Michael could not believe his eyes. He rubbed them, thinking he was hallucinating, but Sarah was still standing in front of him. "This isn't possible," he mumbled. You're dead." "Yes, I am," Sarah replied with a sad smile. "But we're all here, Michael, waiting for you." His heart sank as he recognized them. They were his children, Emily and Jason, who had died with Sarah in the car accident. "Daddy," they exclaimed joyfully, running up to him. Michael fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He hugged his children, feeling their cold bodies. "How is this possible?" he asked, looking at Sarah. "We were always here, Michael," she replied, "waiting for you. Now we can be together again." Michael felt a strange sense of peace envelop him. He was no longer afraid, cold, or tired. All he wanted was to be with his family. Michael looked at Sarah, and she held out her hand to him. Without hesitation, he took it. At that moment, everything around him dissolved into a bright light. Michael opened his eyes abruptly. He was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical devices. His brother, David, was sitting next to him. "Michael, you're finally awake," David exclaimed with relief. "You had an accident 3 months ago," David explained. "You were in a coma. The doctors didn't give you much hope." Michael slowly realized the reality. The accident, the coma, the dream of meeting his family at the cemetery. Everything was mixed in his head. "I'm so sorry, brother," David said, squeezing his hand. "I know how much you miss them. But you have to move on. It's what they would have wanted." Michael closed his eyes, remembering his strange dream. Was it just a dream? Or was it something more? He did not know the answer, but he felt that this event had changed him forever. When he opened his eyes again, there was a new determination in them. Michael realized that he had been given a second chance at life, and he would use it to do something meaningful, something his family could be proud of. Jake Summers always dreamed of becoming a famous YouTuber. At the age of 16, he already had a channel with a few thousand subscribers, but it wasn't enough. He wanted to create something truly viral, something that would make him an internet sensation. The idea came out of the blue. There were rumors at school about an old abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. It was said to be haunted by the ghost of the old owner, who died under mysterious circumstances. Jake decided this was his chance. "I'm going to film a real ghost," he announced to his friends, Emily and Mark. "It's going to be the bomb." Emily looked at him skeptically. "Jake, ghosts aren't real. It's a stupid idea." But Mark was excited. "Dude, this is going to be awesome. I'm in." The next Friday night, Jake, armed with a camera and flashlights, went to the old house with Mark. Emily refused to go, saying she had a bad feeling about it. The house looked exactly like a horror movie, a sloping roof, broken windows, creaking doors. Jake turned on the camera and started his ghost vlog. Hey guys, today Mark and I are going to meet a real ghost. Subscribe and like us. They entered the house. It was dark inside and smelled like mold. Jake and Mark slowly moved through the rooms, lighting their way with flashlights. It's creepy in here, Mark whispered. Don't be a coward, Jake replied, though he could feel the shivers running down his spine. Suddenly they heard a sound upstairs, as if someone was walking on the old floor. Did you hear that? Mark asked in a trembling voice. Yes, Jake answered, trying to hide his own fear. Let's check it out. They climbed the stairs, which creaked menacingly under their feet. The second floor was even darker. Hello, is anyone there? Jake called out, trying to make his voice sound confident for the camera. Suddenly, the door at the end of the corridor slammed shut. Mark screamed and ran down the stairs. Jake was left alone, trembling with fear, but still holding the camera. Yeah, you guys, I think there's really something here, he whispered into the camera. He slowly approached the closed door. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. Taking a deep breath, he abruptly opened the door. And at that moment, he was surrounded by bright light and shouts of "Surprise!" Jake blinked in surprise. All of his friends, including Emily and Mark, were standing in the room with balloons and cake. On the wall was a poster that said, "Happy birthday, Jake." What? What's going on? He asked, still not believing his eyes. Emily walked over to him, smiling. We decided to throw you a surprise birthday party. We knew you wouldn't turn down the chance to see a ghost. But the sounds? The door slamming shut? Mark laughed. That was just me. I played my part as the frightened friend and then ran over here to help with the final preparations. Jake couldn't believe it. All his fear was replaced with joy and gratitude. You're the best friends in the world, he said, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. But that's not all, Emily said. We recorded everything on a hidden camera. Your reaction was priceless. Jake realized that his dream had come true, though not in the way he had expected. The video of his frightened reaction and unexpected surprise went viral, and his channel gained hundreds of thousands of new subscribers. But most importantly, he realized that the real value is not in online fame, but in friends who are willing to do something special for him. From that day on, Jake changed the direction of his channel. Instead of ghost hunting, he started making videos about friendship, kindness, and unexpected surprises for people. And it made him not just popular, but truly happy. The name's Tom Baker, and I've seen some strange things in my 45 years, but nothing compares to what happened to me at the old Crowley Mansion. I'm just a regular guy from Cincinnati, work as an insurance adjuster, married with 2 kids. Never believed in ghosts or any of that supernatural mumbo-jumbo. Well, at least I didn't until that night. It all started when my company sent me to assess the Crowley Mansion for a potential buyer. The place had been abandoned for decades, ever since the Crowley family tragedy back in the 60s. I'd heard stories about the place growing up, whispers about old man Crowley going crazy and offing his whole family before taking his own life. But hey, that's just small-town gossip, right? I arrived at the mansion just as the sun was setting. The place was massive, 3 stories of Victorian grandeur gone to seed. Ivy crawled up the walls and the windows stared out like dead eyes. I'll admit, I felt a chill as I walked up to the front door, but I chalked it up to the autumn wind. The realtor was supposed to meet me there, but no one was around. The door was unlocked, so I figured they must be inside. I stepped into the foyer and, man, it was like stepping back in time. Dust-covered furniture, old paintings on the walls, even a grandfather clock that somehow still ticked away in the corner. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. Just the echo of my voice bouncing off the walls. I decided to start my assessment while I waited. The first floor was impressive. A grand living room, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a dining room with a table long enough to seat 20. But as I walked from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like the air was too thick or the shadows were a little too dark. I headed up to the second floor. That's when things started getting weird. I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there, and the temperature kept dropping. I could see my breath in some of the rooms. It was in the master bedroom that I first saw him. I was examining an old wardrobe when I caught a reflection in the mirror. A man, dressed in clothes from another era, standing right behind me. His face was twisted in a look of pure hatred. I spun around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. I told myself I was just seeing things. Too many horror movies, you know? But then I heard his voice, clear as day. "Get out of my house." I ran, tried to anyway. But somehow I couldn't find the stairs. The hallways seemed to stretch on forever, doors opening into rooms I swear I'd already been in. It was like the house itself was changing, trying to keep me trapped. And all the while I kept catching glimpses of him, in windows, in mirrors, always with that same hateful look. Sometimes he'd be holding an axe, other times a rope fashioned into a noose. And always, always that voice. "You don't belong here. This is my house, my family." I don't know how long I wandered those halls. Hours, maybe. I found myself in rooms that couldn't possibly exist. A nursery where the toys moved on their own. A kitchen where the faucets ran with what looked horribly like blood. Finally, I ended up back in the foyer. The front door was right there, my escape just feet away. But he was there too, old man Crowley, standing between me and freedom. "You've seen too much," he said, his voice like gravel. "You'll have to join us now." That's when I saw them, the ghosts of his family, his wife, his children, all with the same empty eyes and sorrowful expressions. They reached out to me, their hands passing through my skin and chilling me to the bone. I don't remember how I got out. I have flashes, running, the ghost's howls of rage, the front door splintering as I crashed through it. The next thing I knew, I was in my car, speeding down the driveway. I quit my job the next day. Couldn't handle the thought of ever stepping foot in another empty house. My wife says I haven't been the same since, and she's right. How can I be, knowing what's out there? The Crowley mansion still stands as far as I know. Sometimes I drive by it just to make sure it's real. And every time I swear I can see old man Crowley watching me from the upstairs window, waiting for me to come back. So that's my story. Believe it or don't. It's up to you. But take my advice. If you ever find yourself in an old empty house and you start feeling like something's watching you, don't look in the mirrors. You might not like what you see looking back.